We got it.
Got it. Okay, everybody, welcome to our virtual model boat show. It's been 3 years since we've gotten together, and while it's really nice to be in person, but we'll do that soon. We hope to do it next year. As Dr. Fauci said, it's an endemic now, not a pandemic, so that's promising. So we'll keep you posted on our plans for 2023. As you all know, museum former director Jennifer Gaines, whom you all remember, will give a short history of the model boat show. Then we will have 5 presentations tonight. You will all be muted, but if you have questions, please put them in chat at the bottom of your screen there, and we'll answer those later. This will be videotaped, and will be put on our website in case anyone has missed it and wants to see it. So welcome to the Woods Hole Historical Museum virtual model boat show. Jennifer, take over.
Okay.
Wait a minute now.
My techie is helping me here. Bong. Okay. So you remember that we always had the model boat show every other year, so people would have time to make a wonderful new model and then tell us about it when they got here. So since we haven't been able to do that, we are doing this instead. And we have these nice people who are going to tell us what they've been doing. Okay, it's not forwarding. Great. Okay.
Why isn't it forwarding, folks?
Cliff.
Use your arrow key.
Yeah, we were.
Okay, and click the screen.
Sorry, folks.
Can you leave full screen and go back to it?
There you go.
Oh, there you go.
What did you
It's just delayed.
Just
Well, do I do this one again?
hit that again.
This one? Oh, okay. And the model boat show, which was started 25 years ago, was started with Paul Ferris Smith's guidance, his enthusiasm and his energy. And he started it all, and we are grateful to him. Here are the presenters who are going to speak tonight, and I'll do a little introduction for each of them when the time comes. And here is our last poster. And unfortunately, the person who designed this one has left town, but we'll see next time what happens. It should be good. This is, I think, our first model boat show. And the community hall, as now, was the largest exhibit hall, but then it was a great scrum of models, half models and big pond models and static models, and it was grand. And there were, of course, boats that were exquisite and sublime in all their details. And there were others that were, well, other. This one was designed specifically to make it across the Atlantic with a GPS attached, and it did. Some boats came not done, not finished, but in process, which was grand, and others came finished. And throughout this all, the American Model Yacht Association and the Vintage Model Yacht Group have helped us. At the beginning, they got us in touch with a lot of modelers and came as modelers themselves and racers. And here in the middle of all this, as we call John's fleet, is John Stout, who's the present president of the U.S. Vintage Model Yacht Group. And those are all his boats, and he'll be one of our speakers tonight. And this was a different year, same place. And at one time we had this boat front and center at the entrance to the community hall because it won the prize for having traveled the longest distance to get here under its own steam. Well, not steam, but it was a radio control boat that sailed over from Vineyard Haven on Martha's Vineyard. It was quite grand. We have 7 exhibit halls, not only the community hall, but also the fire station next door, the old fire station, which always had an interesting collection of boats. Yes, Stearns. And next down, we have been using the Oceanographics Smith Conference Room, where my husband Arthur has been arranging special exhibits on a theme. This was, I believe, the year of boats with a story. Farther down the road, we've exhibited in the MBL Club. I think these are all Fred Abbey's models. More recently, it's become the stronghold of the marine modelers of New England. And of course, Peel Craftsman and the Partridges were off left at the water view. For the beginning years, we also exhibited in the Candle House that belongs to the Marine Biological Laboratory across the road. And that was rather grand too, good lighting. And of course, back up at the other end of town in the library front room, we've always had a gob of models, but the best one of all was this one, who's Tom Loria, another one of our speakers who not only exhibited some of his finished models, but was always there working on a project. And he was always very nice and would talk to people and tell them. And he also was very instructive on scale. I remember his exhibit of oars that was just all, I think 5, Tom, 5 different oars, all different scales.
With 3.
Only 3, it seemed like 5 in my memory. And downstairs in the library, we've had a whole series of different talks that have been on all kinds of interesting subjects. And in the museum, we've always had an exhibit, most recently pond models, which are like the ones I sailed as a kid, where we'd lean over the granite curb and place them in the park pond and then run around to catch them on the other side. But the ones at the museum, we've added photographs in our archives at the museum, which I always love. And also at the museum outside, we've had a program for kids where they have been making models of the Witzel Spritzel boat, our icon, and a pool for the kids to play in. You can see the Spritzels in the background, and then some of the Marine Modeler Club's Willie's tugboats, which were a big hit. They came for a couple of years. But this reminds me that we've always had a water part of the show as well as a dry land part. And many of those boats, a surprising number of those boats that look so exquisite, could go in the water. Exquisite in terms of detail. I hadn't realized that Fred's boats were all radio controlled until I saw this going on. And then there was this one that escaped and went out into Woods Hole Passage. Yikes. But in back of the Redfield building, which is an oceanographic building, we launched our boats for the races. These are the over 36-inch class. John, what are they? Anyway, those are the big ones. And that's another big one. But all those people in the background are looking at the races for the under 36-inch class. These are the Soling models walking down to launch. And here's our own Jim Linville racing his boat with his thumbs. Well, a little forefinger too. It's surprisingly difficult to run a boat with 2 thumbs. I can attest to that. And it takes a remarkable amount of concentration. It is astonishing. And some days we've had some lovely mild wind. We use the buoys in the pond for race markers, and we set out some little buoys for the start and finish. Some days it has not been quite so mild. I think the lower picture has a capsizel in it. I'm not positive. But here are some of the big boats too. Those are the M Marblehead class, aren't they? I think so, the upper picture. But boy, are they beautiful. Yes?
Yes,
This one is a wheeler?
this is a wheeler.
Yeah. Phew, they're big and beautiful.
Ready about.
And these are, Cliff? Are these
Probably
wheelers?
also Marbleheads.
Marbleheads. It was just dazzling every time. Oh, and one of the nicest things that the Minuteman Model Yacht Club did for us, local women, was to loan us their Solings on a short series of races so we could race them. So all these women, except one, are locals who are used to sailing 18-foot knockabouts. We were thrilled. Oh, we even get prizes too. We were doubly thrilled. And it takes a lot of volunteers, a lot behind the scenes and before the event. And then there are those during the event. These are a couple of our volunteers selling tickets at the community hall. And you'll see Alex Bellinger hiding back there in his spot in the corner. And here are some other volunteers. It may not look as if they're working hard, but they're there at the pond in case anyone of the racers or sailors needs some assistance. And they often do get stuck in various things out there in the pond or capsized and get wet or whatever. Their working's wet. And Jay in the foreground really deserved this nice little time in the sun because he was in charge of getting all the tables from all over town arranged to borrow them. And then he brought them in his truck and then he carried them into the hall. And carrying them into the community hall is no easy trick. And then that not being enough, he also patrolled the streets in the night to make sure all the halls were wrapped up tight. But Paul taught me, and it's continued, that the exhibitors are the most important part of this show, that without them, we could do nothing. And these are the ones who I call our smallest exhibitors. Because Tony on the left puts his models into light bulbs, and Alex on the right puts his into bottles, including Mount Gay rum bottles. So appreciating them as much as we do, we have a couple of parties for them, one when they get here on Friday and another on Saturday to celebrate the success of the day. Oh, and lest I go whipping past, Rob Napier's on the right. He's another one of our speakers tonight. And I realized I forgot to mention that one thing we've done recently in the community hall cellar was have our dockyard sales. And that's been great fun. People can sell stuff and some of us can buy stuff. And we have had small variations over the years, like we used to have a submarine tank where we could walk in and watch the subs go by. It was quite thrilling. Anyway, the 2 days of the event go all too quickly. And by Saturday afternoon, it's time to get all those boats back into those little cars, pack them up, and say goodbye, and we'll see you in 2 years. Although in this case, it's going to be more. Okay, so now I stop and I introduce Tom Loria, who, oh, hi, Cliff. I'm introducing Tom Loria, who has been at the show every single time. And you got a little hint of him there in the library. He restores beautiful old models and also builds from scratch with great care and research. I love the research that goes on with these models. Okay, so how do we get Tom up on the screen?
I will share my screen with you
There we
guys.
go.
Okay, so do you want me to mute us?
Sure. The host muted.
Well, this is fun.
Really nice. We practiced this 3 times already, and it was
Yeah.
beautiful. Mm. Yep. Huh.
Your screen share, good.
Mhm.
Getting there. There you go.
Okay, well, finally, that didn't take too terribly long. Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm going to get right into this because I'm going to be running my mouth for quite a while. So I'm just going to get right into this. And so I don't forget it. And so I don't ad lib too much like I'm doing now. I'm going to be reading this, so forgive me. At the 2019 Woods Hole Model Boat Show, I exhibited my model of Alice S. Wentworth and a model of Weano Sr. These were the last 2 big projects I had time to do. Since then, and I think largely due to the pandemic, I've been busy with repair work, and I'm still busy and will be busy for at least the next year or so. So no new models. But I do have a pretty unusual project on the bench right now. The Bayhead Historical, excuse me, the Bayhead Historical Society of Bayhead, New Jersey, approached me about repurposing a model of the Noang fishing vessel, the MSC Berry. Now, the Berry was originally built as a sloop, as you see here, but for most of her life, she actually was rigged as a schooner. And I don't know how Bayhead Historical came into the possession of this model, but since the Berry had spent almost 40 years of her life in and around the Barnegat Bay area on the Jersey Shore, this was an important part of that area's maritime past. So my charge from Bayhead Historical was to make the model look the way the boat did about 1936, after it had undergone a major rehabilitation at the hands of her new owner, a fellow by the name of Slade Dale. He was a prominent businessman and resident of the town. He also owned a marina, and he was a yachtsman too. So quite an important person, and he and Emma Berry were very well known in that area. Now, for a ship model repair guy, the idea of totally changing the reason for a model's existence is not something I'm altogether comfortable with under normal circumstances. But in this particular case, I could see the benefit. If a museum's main purpose is to educate and preserve their history, they should be able to do that to the best of their ability with whatever resources they have and the finances available. They had a model that was basically useless to them in its current state. I mean, it looks nice, but it really didn't have much going for it for what they needed. Now, if it can be repurposed to serve their educational need, and it can be done for about a quarter of the price of commissioning a new work, then why not? So what have I done? What have I done so far, I should say? Well, as you can see from these photos, there were many issues with the hull. It was poorly planked and not all that accurately laid out. There were hard spots and unfair lines throughout the hull. In short, almost any defect you could think of committing on a boat model was executed on this poor model, and some of it with frightening efficiency. Now, I knew going in, as did Bayhead Historical, that they were not going to come out with a perfect hull. So the idea for me was to correct the things that I could, and the things that I couldn't, I was just going to have to try and make them less noticeable. Now, the model itself was built from a kit manufactured by the Sterling Model Company in Philadelphia at a scale of 1:16, or 3/4 of an inch to the foot. So this is a fairly big model. It was designed as an RC sailing model. And given that fact, the kit manufacturers didn't seem to be overly concerned with historical accuracy or scale fidelity. But in spite of those shortcomings, as you've seen, it really does make a rather nice appearance. And speaking of nice, one of the nicer aspects of this project is that Bayhead Historical Society had a lot of photos and a lot of written material for the boat the way they wanted the model portrayed. So this was immensely helpful. I had no trouble focusing in on the details that were most important to them. So this made my job a little bit easier, even if the actual work didn't. Now, for instance, the model shows the schooner with a cabin between the masts. Now, this was added sometime after the work that was done in 1935 and 1936. So this has been eliminated, and a cargo hatch is, well, it isn't installed yet, but it's made. Now, here's another model of the Berry, rigged as a sloop, but you see the more traditional color scheme. Now, Slade Dale had Emma painted this way during that 1936 period, so the model will reflect that. You'll also notice that this model has a shear strake and a spray rail. Our model, rigged as the schooner, does not. Now, and if you look towards the back, towards the stern, you'll see a little bump out there. And that transom, it's the transom. It overhangs the boat, the sides of the boat, by a pretty good amount. On our Bayhead model, this is not like that, so that'll have to be corrected. And there's a lot more stuff to worry about or to take care of. The trail boards, for one thing, and the stern decorations will need to be replaced, and so they could come a bit closer to the ones that what you see here. The spars also will need to be replaced. Their dimensions were off in just about every direction. And the original pot metal or lead fittings for the rigging and for the deck fittings all have to go. And I will make new sails for the model. And the museum asked if I could display the model with the jumbo, the foresail, and the mainsail all set. And they would like the jib and the main topsail flaked down. So that's what we'll do. And with any large project that I undertake, I always give a client a photo book explaining everything that I did and why I did it, the materials I used. It's a nice way to chronicle everything, and that book can always travel with the model, whether it's a repair or whether it's a model I built from scratch. But lately, I've taken to recording the projects on video. So I'm chronicling the repairs, and with the permission of Bayhead Historical, I'll post the project on my YouTube channel, and it'll probably be at least 2, probably 3 or 4 episodes. Of course, they'll get the director's cut with more information that's specific to them and less fluff. And here is the hull with all its warts to this point. This is what it looks like today. And I know it doesn't look great now, but I'm sure the many glaring defects you see here will be much less noticeable when the paint goes on and the model is in its correct orientation. So that's what's been keeping me off the streets at night. And I'd like to say thank you to Jennifer, Debbie, Chris, and everybody at Woods Hole who put this presentation together. As Jennifer said, I've been to every one of these since 1997, and this is a very special show for me. It's the one show I always look forward to. And having to wait 2 years for the next one is always tough. So this has been really tough, and I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say, can't wait till April 2023. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Am I muted?
Nope,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, can anybody else hear me? Okay, fine. Thanks, Tom. That was nice. It was a nice vote of thanks and approval, and also was a wonderful hint of all the research that goes on behind these models, which is so impressive. And I think our next speaker, who is Alex Bellinger, who specializes in chips and bottles, will also speak to that to some degree. And and I just love Alex's models. I would walk by his exhibit in the community hall and just stand there and ogle. They're really quite grand. Okay, Alex, ready?
Yes.
Okay, hit it.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer and Deborah and Cliff for getting us all together like this, even though we can't be doing it in person. And I think it's interesting to look back over the years, past couple of years, and what we've been doing. And unlike my colleagues, I'm afraid I have rather a scatter of slides. Can I have the first one, please? This is the fishing schooner Elsie. It's at an 1/8 of an inch to the foot. And this is the project which I dedicated the most time to in a single project. It's not characteristic of the kind of thing I do. So ironically, if we were in Woods Hole right now, I probably would not have brought it. It also represents a vessel which is represented by many very fine models, many of them at this scale. Next slide, please. It's 1/8 inch to the foot. There's a fine kit for Elsie made by Model Shipways, but this model is scratch built. And I'm starting with this because it was probably the greatest source of personal satisfaction and learning for me. I've made a lot of models of fishing schooners, and I really thought I knew them. And I found out quite a bit that I didn't. Next one, please. This is more like what people expect from me. This is a 2-gallon bottle that used to be used for fuel for a kerosene stove. I've heard about these stoves. I've never actually seen one, but that bottle would sit upright, its neck down on top of the stove, and the fuel would be controlled by a spring-loaded cap. And when it was empty, they'd take it out to the barn and fill it from the vat, or maybe a local service would fill it. It all sounds very dangerous to me, but in any case, it makes an excellent bottle for ships and bottles. It's good size, so you can put a good size model in it, and I think it's a very good shape for it. This particular model in here is the 1854 Brigantine Newsboy, very popular model. It's at about 18 feet to the inch. It's the second of these bottles that I've used. I've had a number of them for years and have been sort of working up the nerve to use them because the neck is small. So the hull has to be entered in pieces. It has to go down that neck in pieces and be reassembled inside, which rather complicates the whole business of rigging it, putting it back together, making it look the way it should. Next, please. Marshall Gaffney also attends Woods Hole, and I believe he's with us tonight, and he likes rum. And I was in his kitchen a few years ago, and he had a rum bottle there, and I kind of liked the size and shape of it, and I asked him if he saved me the empty, I'd put a ship in it. He did, and I did, and this is what happened. It's a 1.75 liter bottle. I never remember what kind of brand of rum it is, but Jennifer reminded me tonight. I think it's Bay rum. And it actually is very good for ships and bottles. This is the first of 3 models I've made in these bottles. And I wanted to let you know, Marshall, that Tony Coulter at Colton admired these, and I gave him a couple of the bottles you gave me, which hopefully he will get use out of too. The glass quality isn't terrific because it's molded glass and there are letters on one side, not the side you're seeing. And but it really connects with the inspiration that got me involved with ships and bottles many years ago. This is the big Downeaster Henry Hyde. The others I did were a big Maine coasting schooner and a British tea clipper. Next, please. This is what I devoted this is certainly the largest number of models coming out of my shop for these past couple of years. These are models that go into glass ornaments. This is a friendship sloop. It's a typical glass ornament. You used to be able to pick up at hobby shops. They're about 100 millimeters in diameter. The little model in there is about 1/16 of an inch to the foot. I usually make these in batches. I've made dozens of them over the years. I like to think that each batch is an improvement over the last, and the first model made in a batch is improved on by the last one. Next one, please. A couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the craft stores started introducing flattened glass ornaments. They call them discs. They're the same diameter. They're 100 millimeters, just about 4 inches. And this gave me the opportunity to move on to something I thought about for years, the Cape Cod catboat. Some of the inspiration for trying this was the museum's own emblem with the, what do you call it, skiff rigged little boat, which looks like a catboat. And I would see it there in the circle and I think, well, I could do this. And I finally got around to doing a batch of them. This is the third or fourth or something like that. And this is something that I think has good promise as I make more of them. I'm sorry the photograph is so dark because it's sort of a sweet light thing. And the last slide, please. This is something I only started this past winter. This is a Hudson River sloop. It's also on one of these ornaments. I'm making a batch of them now. I've got a couple of them done. This is like the Friendship sloop, but it's a much larger vessel. The Friendship sloop at 16 feet to the inch is almost a typical scale, whereas this is more like 40 feet to the inch. It's a much larger vessel. It's a lot more involved. It's got an afterdeck, a little bit more deck furniture. It's got a little stern boat on it. And I think of this as like a car made on Monday. This is my first. And as I continue to make more of them, I hope I will be able to iron out some of the little odds and ends on them. I don't know how far I'll go with this. And right now, I'm actually moved on to a different sort of thing altogether with Dark Harbor knockabouts. As my colleagues and friends, who I greatly admire, dedicate years into a single project, and I flit along like a grasshopper, producing all these things that are more like sketches of ship models rather than full ship models. But as they're toiling away and they're actually raising the standards of ship modeling, I pick up a bottle and I think, well, this really won't take me that much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I must say you have a most productive skipping along, more productive than anything I've done. Our next speaker will be Rob Napier, who I think came to us because he's a friend of Tom. His first public show when he came to the boat show was as a speaker. And at that time, he was working on a model for the Museum of Fine Arts of a Dutch ship. I asked you this the other day. I can't remember, Rob. 15th century, 16th century? Old, very old model.
18th century.
Oh, not so old. 18th century ship model. And he was doing exquisite work. And he continues to do exquisite work. Okay, Rob, ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go.
Are we there?
Looks like.
We're here.
Okay, good. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, for including me. It's great. I love the Woods Hole show. It's something I look forward to go down on the Cape where I used to live, but haven't lived there for a long time now. One little footnote is that Dutch model I did for the MFA has recently been moved out of the ship model gallery last fall into a huge new 6 or 7 gallery Dutch culture and art exhibit in a different part of the museum. And now it's speaking not just for ship models, but also for Dutch culture. And I think the model has been moved into, is doing a much bigger job in the MFA than it used to do before. What I'm going to talk about tonight is this boat named Gossoon. This boat was built in 1890. And it was built in South Boston by George Lawley and Son. It was a racing yacht, 40 feet on the waterline, about 53 feet overall. And it belonged to Charles Francis and George Caspar Adams, the Adams boys, who were great-grandchildren of President John Quincy Adams. And these two guys raced a lot of different boats. They didn't keep boats very long. And so in 1890, they had this boat designed by Edward Burgess, who was the red hot naval architect in those days. He had just done 3 America's Cup boats and would soon fall to typhoid fever at the age of 43. This boat was purpose designed and built to beat a William Fife design named Minerva. And so we'll see a picture of that in a minute. So on the left, you see a picture of Gossoon sailing. And I want you to notice that there are 3 deck openings, rectangular deck openings there with basically nothing in them. One's open and the other 2 have gratings on them. When they raced, they just put gratings on so they wouldn't, the deck structures wouldn't be in the way. And so they could, handle sails without snagging and stuff like that. These guys were really serious racers. This picture was taken by Nathaniel Stebbins. The one on the right is on the railway, probably at Lawley's Yard, and is great because it shows the midship section of the boat very clearly and the rigging of the bowsprit. The only thing that was available for the documentation for this, other than quite a few photographs, was a set of lines. There were no rigging plans, deck arrangements, or anything like that. So all the rest of this all of that had to be extrapolated. The picture on the left, which was taken by an outfit called the Detroit Photographic Company, which took beautiful, beautiful yachting photographs, which are now in the Library of Congress and also conveniently in the public domain, are unbelievably sharp. And from this image, you can go down on deck and see exactly how the deck is laid and how other things are done on the deck of the boat. On the upper right, you see a picture of Gossoon, the white boat, sailing in a calm, and right behind her is Minerva, the boat she was built to beat, which she's doing right there. But they never determined absolutely which one was the better boat, which was kind of too bad because right after this, other things happened in the yacht design world that blew this class out of competition. The bottom picture on the right shows the detail of the rigging from high on the mast of the upper picture. And you can see in that picture exactly what kind of blocks are being used, what kind of rigging arrangement there is, and all kinds of things like that. That's what makes working from these photographs so delicious. Also, you can see in this particular picture that the mast hoops are probably made out of metal and not made out of wood as we normally think. One of the pictures taken by Detroit Publishing, our photographic company, was a very much dead broadside picture in the upper left. And because I like working for starboard side views, I flipped it around and blew it up and used that photograph for detailing or figuring out the deck arrangement, where the skylights go and all the fittings on the deck and where the rigging lines come down and things of that nature. Notice here that there are 2 skylights in a companionway over the deck openings, which means here they're not racing, they're just going to or from a race. On the lower right, you see 2 superimposed rigging plans. One is for a boat named Lyris and the other is for a boat named Papoose. And Papoose was designed by Burgess as well. It's the smaller boat there. And all these boats were of a genre. And so it was possible to extract the proportions of Gossoon's rig from these images like this. For those of you who may wonder what is a Gossoon was an impish little troublemaking young boy in Ireland in the 19th century. And its root is the French garçon. And the Adams boys named all their boats with a double O letter combination: Papoose, Gossoon, Baboon, Harpoon, Monsoon, and so on. So I think this is the only photograph I have of the model under construction. It's a solid hull model above the waterline. It's made out of basswood. The center of it has been hollowed a little bit to go down to a plate. And the plate serves, there's a brass plate down in that long, thin rectangle that does 2 things. It provides mooring places for the mounting screws coming up through the baseboard, and it also provides a firm plate for the mast to sit on. And then the deck will be laid down over those sort of semi-deck beams. Decking goes fore and aft along the center line. It does not follow the deck edge, as we could see in that picture. And this picture was taken, I think, to show all the tools that I use in laying a deck. It has a basswood deck. Here's the finished model. Below the waterline is Honduras mahogany. The boat would have been coppered or perhaps painted red, but they were, you know, with anti-fouling paint, but they were coppering yachts this size in the 19th century. And I like the visual texture that the mahogany gives to the underbody portion of the boat, but without having to put copper plates on, which I think almost always look not too great on models, even by the great model builders, and they're a brutal thing to take care of. You can't handle the model at all. And if the wood shrinks, the plates come off, which is not very cool. So the model is about 20 inches long on deck, and it's 3/8 of an inch to the foot scale. And now we'll see a couple of details. This is looking at the deck. One of the things that's interesting is it's got hollow in the shear line and plan view. When you look down at the boat in plan view, you can see that the bow is pinched, which is sort of unusual, but that line reflects the clipper bow that you see below. The scroll work there was taken, picked off very carefully from the picture that you saw of her sailing in a calm with Minerva earlier. This shows some of the metal work and rigging work near the mast. The turnbuckles, the maximum diameter of the turnbuckles is exactly a 1/16 of an inch, and the turnbuckles are operative for setting up steel wire rope standing rigging, just like on the boat. And you can see the copper mast hoops there and other fittings made out of brass. Some of the blocks there, most of the blocks you see there are wooden. Well, you actually can only really see two, but they're more in the picture that are made out of brass. And the chain plates down here on the bottom underneath the turnbuckles, those are structured from the photographs. Showing the stern area. All these blocks, the deck houses, the spars, the rail, all of that darker wood is pear wood, and the blocks are all built up. The longest block there, the main sheet double and triple, are about 5/16 of an inch long. They're not very big, and they have individual cheeks and filler pieces, individual shivs, individual pins, and internal brass strops, just like regular built-up blocks.
Wow.
And so the regular blocks you see on the topmast backstays, which are these here, each of those has 4 pieces of wood and 3 pieces of brass in it. And this triple block has, I don't know, a whole bunch of pieces of wood. So this is the basic arrangement back here, and you can see a couple of little brass blocks here for the crotch tackles, which keep the big boom solid down in the boom crotch. And here's the doublings at the top of the lower mast, showing the hardware up there, all of which was picked out of photographs very carefully. And when you rig with wire, the rigging is very, very fine. In real life, it's only about 1/4 of an inch in diameter, which means on the model here, it's about 8/1000 of an inch in diameter is what these main shrouds are, and other things are much lighter. So the standing rigging here is all very lightweight. The running rigging is all silk. And where Tom makes booklets when he's done, I sometimes do books as well. But one of the things I've taken to lately is I've been doing these drawings like this in Adobe Illustrator, and this drawing is the same size as the model. So the length from bowsprit to main boom end is about 34 inches, I think. And it's got phenomenal detail on it. It's got every piece that's on the model is represented in this drawing. And the drawing itself was a pretty monumental task. And the drawing is developed from the research work that I do before I start. And so that gets refined as I go along. And so the drawing and the model are basically the same when the project gets done. And now my talk is done.
Oh, boy. Rob, that was impressive. I guess it sort of shows why I love these talks, because you get to hear the history behind it, the research, the archival digging. And I love to read mystery stories. So, of course, that comes into play, too. Next, we have John Stout to speak, and he is full of energy, and he's going to show us just one thing he's been doing in the past few years, and it's very impressive. And he I shouldn't say rather than archives, but he really looks at the model to see what's going on in there. Okay, John.
Next. Thanks all for coming tonight. I would like to welcome you and share a little bit about what I do. I build, restore, and sail pond yachts, which are different than the static models, the beautiful static models that have been discussed so far this evening. And this is an example of some of the work that I have done. Canterbury J in the upper left. Lower left is Rod Carr's National Championship International A boat that I restored and refurbished by new electronics in the boat. The middle photograph is of a Detroit school boat. Yes, the Detroit schools had a program that began in 1929, the middle schools and the high schools, and they taught the boys how to build 24, 30, and 36-inch pond boats that they raced at the end of the year on Belle Isle in the river off of Detroit. Upper right photograph is a restored J boat. Speaking of J boats, the photograph behind me, my image on the upper right, is a J boat regatta in Bristol, Rhode Island, about a block from the Herreshoff Museum. It's the first time that Halsey Herreshoff, Nate's grandson, had his hands on a remote control and sailed a J boat, and he had an absolute ball. Photograph in the lower right is a kit boat that I'm working on right now for a client that is a Dark Harbor 17. Next, please. There is a really good article in the journal that the publication that the U.S. Vintage Model Yacht Group publishes 3 times a year on decision-making that you would make as you're considering a restoration project. It's a very good article with a decision tree about trying to determine what the model is, where it was built, who may have built it, those kinds of things. And yes, the photograph in this slide of a boat that looks like it should go in the trash, the boat is restorable. And that will be worked on in a class that I'm teaching this summer. Next slide. This is an international A boat built in the mid-40s, most likely by Bill Bethel, but I could not determine that to 100% accuracy. The gentleman that owned the boat bought it from a dealer in the Boston area. It's a big boat, 85 inches long, just shy of 10 feet high, and it weighs 65 pounds. When he went to bring that boat out of the car, I almost told him to leave it, because when he picked the boat up to slide it out, the boat was literally twisting from side to side. 90% of the glue joints in the boat had failed. And that was a huge concern to me. Was a much bigger project than I had anticipated. Next, please. The boat was a basket case. This is not a very high quality photograph, but you can get the idea that there were a lot of gaps in the seams between the hull planking. Nearly every one of the seams was open on the hull. The boat just kept on giving. The deck, when I lifted the boat, came off the boat. The keel at one point fell off the boat. I'll show you all of that as we go through this. Next, please. The boat was so big, I would have to have given up one of the workbenches in my shop to work on the boat. So I decided to make a mobile stand with a building board that I had. So this is on casters with this stand. It was a backdoor remedy that actually worked out to my best interest as I got the boat in the stand. It was the stand was the building board was significantly shorter than the boat. It was about 48 inches long. Next slide. And on that, I built a cradle. There were 4 uprights with 2 straps on each set of uprights that I could put the boat in. Next slide. When I did that, because I was holding the boat about 2 feet in from each end, all of the deck plank, all of the hull planks went back into alignment. I quickly got my roll of duct tape and I taped the heck out of the hull to keep as many of the planks in position as I could. Next slide. Here's a picture of the boat in its stand. You can see the uprights with the strapping, and you can see, looking at the stern end of the boat, in those straps, that it was significantly in from the end of the boat, and that pressure at those 2 points on the boat actually caused the boat to realign, which surprised the heck out of me. In this photo, you can also see that the deck beams are all, the deck planks are off of the boat. They came off easily, every plank separated from every other plank. They were all numbered and positioned to go back on the boat because I didn't have any damage to the planks as they came off the boat. The early glues that were used just did not stand up over time, and that's part of the problem. The other thing that I didn't know until a couple of years ago, when talking to someone who was in the really old pond yachts, he said, you realize that a lot of these boats were built to last 1 season and 1 season only. A lot of the things were undersized on them, and you'll see some of that in a minute. And they didn't overbuild them. They built them to be fast. They built them to race, and they expected that next year they would build another boat. Next slide. On the left, you can see the deck beams inserted at the top of the hull, the shear strike area. And while this is a tight fit, there is no glue in that joint. When I lifted up on one of them, it came right out, and I realized they were all loose in the boat. The center photograph shows the keel having broken off the hull. This was right after it broke off, and I was moving the boat, and I was very careful whenever I moved the boat. And the next thing, I was rolling it, and the next thing I knew, I had the entire keel in my hand off the boat. But you can see that the brake was so clean, I was able to clean it up and reattach it later. The inside of the hull is a good indication that the boat was probably worked on before I worked on it. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a few minutes. The broken frame pieces, you can see them laying on the starboard side of the hull. A lot of the frames were not attached. They were strictly being held in with the pressure between the shear strike and the keelson on the boat, and they all had to be re-glued into the boat. And you also notice how small the deck beams are. It led to another thing that I had to do along the way. Next. The deck beams had very small pieces laying on top of them that came loose when the deck planks were taken off. And you can see the cross section here. These are only about 3/8 of an inch thick and about 1/4 of an inch wide. So I decided to sister additional pieces on the bottom. You see, I saw curved the pieces so that I could replicate the curve and not distort the curve when I added these pieces to the bottom. So the pieces were added to the bottom, the pieces were placed back on the top, and everything was re-glued together for all of the deck beams. Next. And of course, you never have enough clamps to do your work. Next slide. And you never have enough props. The props were being used, and the inside of the hull looks a little messy. It was cleaned up as it was finished, but I needed to do this in order to get the rigidity back and get everything re-adhered in the hull. But I used the 1/4-inch dowel props to push some of the seams back together. While most of the seams went back when the up pressure was applied to the hull, there were still some that had to be maneuvered, and I used the dowels in order to do that. Next slide. Inside and outside planks were being pushed, nudged with the dowels, and with turning the little clamps around and using them in a reverse position. And of course, a C-clamp to nudge one back into place. But I was able to get the clamps back in pretty good position. Next. So completing the areas of the boat, the inside of the hull was finished. And I also added 1/16-inch plywood strips over the frame members, which were bent oak frames, just to reinforce them. And they were glued in place, reinforced the deck beams. The hatch itself had a veneer inlay. You can see those walnut pieces inside of the mahogany. 3 of those were missing, and I replaced all of them. And the vane steering mechanism on the boat was filthy dirty, and the vane itself was missing, which I replaced. And this is just in a stand waiting to go back on the boat. Next. The chrome fittings, Bill Bethel did a lot of chrome work back in the 40s. I think he was the first person to really use chrome plating. This is another indicator they might be Bethel fittings, but they were pretty much black and they needed to be cleaned up. You can use a metal polish, or sometimes WD-40 works, and they came up pretty clean, and were this is them back on the boat after the deck was finished. Next slide. This is the vane steering mechanism installed back on the boat, cleaned up on its pintle. The pintle was missing on it. I just had the pin on the pintle was missing, which had to be replaced in order for it to go back in position correctly. And you'll notice the maple tow rail around the deck. It was hard to distinguish the different woods when the boat came in. It was so darkened with age and dirty. Next slide. It had no rudder or skeg, and obviously then the rudder shoes would be missing. So this is a new rudder and skeg. The actual notch for the skeg was in the hull, but the skeg itself was missing. And here you can see the straps. After the hull has been cleaned up and refinished, you can see the straps holding the hull, and the shape that the hull was in. It actually turned out well. Next slide. There's a photograph of the shoes. There's generally a shoe on the bottom of a boat of the rudder like this in order to hold the rudder in position because of the length of the rudder. There's so much pressure on the rudder, you need something to hold the bottom of the rudder in position when the boat's in the water. Next slide. This is a photograph. The upper right photograph is a picture of the deck when it came in. It looked like somebody had hit it with a ball peen hammer. And you can see where a lot of the deck planking had come apart. And then you can see the restoration where everything's been glued back together. And I was able to bend and push and hammer lightly with a soft face mallet to get those pieces just above the vane mechanism to where I did not have to replace any planking or cut and fit any pieces into the boat. Next slide. This is the one giveaway that it may have been a Bethel boat. Now, the fitting could have been purchased from Bethel, but he usually stamped WGB on his fittings, the chrome fittings. And this one fitting, the gooseneck on the boat, did in fact have his stamp on it. And that would be William G. Bethel of East Boston. Next slide. The reason why I was unsure that this was a Bethel boat was that it had no signature in the boat. But if you remember, the middle section of the boat had no silver paint on it. I think all of that was removed at one time. And I think they removed the pencil signature because Bethel signed his boats in pencil. This photograph was taken about 6 years ago at the model boat show in Woods Hole. A young man came in and asked John Snow if we could identify a boat for him. He came in and it turned out it was a Marblehead that he found at the dump on Cape Cod. And I got my flashlight. John and I both had our faces in the hatch opening, and sure enough, there was Bill Bethel's signature, which is not evident at all in this A boat that I just restored. Next slide. Next. And this is the finished boat. Everything back in place, finished, restored, everything re-glued. The rig itself was in pretty good shape. All I had to do was some cleaning on the rig, the sails. There was one tear in the sail, and the owner didn't want anything done with the tear in the sail. And this had to have a special boat stand made for it because it was sitting in his house in a 10-foot ceiling, and the keel literally had to sit on the floor because the boat was 9 feet 11.5 inches high. So thank you all. Thank you to the museum for doing this. It was a great way to share some of what we do. Thank you.
And thank you, John. It's just been a thrill to see all these different guys with their restorations or scratch built boats and the different approaches to model boats and the enthusiasm from everybody. I just love it. We're now going to hear a presentation from Cliff Martin and Jim Linville. Jim, you're allowed to talk now. And it's about the Minuteman Model Yacht Club and what they've been up to for the past couple of years. And again, they're the guys who have kept us racing at the Woods Hole model boat shows. So thank you again, and go ahead. Cliff?
Now, yeah, can everybody see this now?
Yep.
Okay,
Mhm.
I want to start off by thanking Debbie and Jennifer for inviting Jim and I to talk about our club and our activities over the last couple of years or so. The Minuteman Model Yacht Club has currently about 45 members. And while most skippers are within the Massachusetts, Rhode Island, or New Hampshire areas, impressively, some travel from as far away as Maine to sail with us and with the Marblehead group. We do have approximately 25 skippers that sail with us on a regular basis, while the rest kind of drop in as time, as family, and as work permits. The Minuteman Club has been around since the early 70s, and these logos kind of represent how our presence and our visibility has evolved over time. I also want to mention that we are cooperating closely with the Nashville Model Yacht Club in Nashville, New Hampshire. They sail with us, and then we sail with them at their venue. Both our clubs have websites that can provide information about our clubs, our sailing schedules, and other club activities to members or to individuals who have an interest and are looking for something to do, of course, when they're not on their big boats. Both of our clubs belong to a governing body called the American Model Yachting Association, or the AMYA. And the AMYA currently recognizes about 33 different classes of model yachts. Our club sails a variety of these recognized classes from one of the largest, the Wheeler that you see up here, and to some of the smallest, which is the Footy down here. The footy is, the wheeler is 79 inches long and the footy is 1 foot long. As you might imagine, some of these classes lend themselves very well to innovation using state-of-the-art technologies. And the footy class is one of those. This hull of this footy, this green one here, the hull, the fin, and the rudder are all made using a 3D printer. And there are other groups who are actually exploring the use of 3D printers in this stuff. And in the end, they're only limited by their design creativity and basically the size of their printer. Now, while most of the MYA classes represent more modern designs, built with more modern materials such as carbon fiber and Kevlar, a few members build and sell some of the more vintage designs built mostly of carved wood, plank on frame, or fiberglass. And these are the materials basically that were available at the time of the original designs. Some of these vintage designs will date back to the 1930s. I have this, just to show you how intricate some of these builds are, I enlarged the bow of the center picture here to show you. And as you can see these diagonal lines here, this hull was built using a cold molded technique. And it actually has to be built like 3 times. The first time you have to build the form for the hull. The second time you have to lay strips of the hull diagonally. And then the third time you have to lay strips on the hull going in the opposite diagonal direction. And if you look hard, you can actually see the diagonals of these strips. It's tedious, but the results are very, very light and very, very strong. These vintage boats are usually built and sailed under the auspices of the U.S. Vintage Model Yacht Group, who, as we learned earlier, is the president is John Stout. Since we only have so many weekends that we can sail, the majority of our club regattas focus on one of 3 classes: the Soling 1 meter, the Dragonflight 95, and the US 1 meter. We picked these classes because the majority of our members have one or more of them, and new members can easily acquire one or build one at a reasonable expense. Our friends at the National Model Yacht Club will come down to Needham to sail their Solings or Dragonflights or US 1 meters, and we'll travel up to Nashua to sail our schooners and our EC-12 boats. These pictures are from the US Vintage Nationals that were held last year or year before last, I think. Well, it was last year. And this is Jim Linville's schooner. Then, as you might guess, all sailing was curtailed in 2020, first because of the pandemic, and second because the town of Needham, where we sail, decided to do some work on Minuteman's primary sailing venue. On the left over here is our pond without water. All the water's been drained away. In the distance, you see a little white house and a lot of excavation equipment. That happened to be the beach where we would launch and sail our boats. On the right, with the more recent picture, and you can see that the pond is beginning to fill. Our clubs were able to cautiously resume a regatta schedule in 2021, and we followed the local and state and government guidelines with regard to masking and social distancing, and we had no problems, fortunately. For us, the racing season begins with the Icebreaker Regatta. Rumor has it that in the past, there's actually been some ice to break before we could sail. These days, hopefully, there's not really any ice breaking that goes on. However, we do give out the traditional Icebreaker trophy, ice bucket trophy to the regatta winner. Throughout the year, Minuteman Model Yacht Club will hold 7 regattas for each of the 3 classes that I mentioned earlier. Each regatta is on a Sunday and that'll take 21 of the 33 available Sundays. Most of the remaining Sundays and Saturdays are open to makeup races or sailing the other classes at Nashua or other surrounding. Here we have pictures of some of the first early icebreakers. Here's the Icebreaker trophy. Here's this year's winner. We also like to conduct special regattas during the year. One such regatta is for skippers over 65 and called the Old Timers Regatta. In this regatta, skippers get their scores favorably adjusted based on their age. The older they are, the more favorably their scores are adjusted. The perpetual trophy for this regatta is a cane, and donated several years ago by one of the older skippers. The picture on the left shows Jim Linville holding the cane. He won that year. And if you look very closely, you can see that there's one brass plaque up here. And then if you look at this cane in the middle, you can see that there's several more that's been added to it over the year. One of the features of this was that you had to be over 65 to sail, but the youngest person in the club was the RD. And so this is our RD for the day here. Another special regatta was the Sue Linville Memorial, which is sponsored by Jim Linville. His wife loved rubber duckies. So every year since her passing, Jim has made and given out ducky trophies to the top winners. And of all the trophies I have, I like these the most. Finally, at the end of the year, we close out our sailing system with season with the 4-hour enduro. Excuse me. Skippers can enter any boat they have in the race. The catch is that this race only has one start and one finish. And in the middle, there's 4 hours of continual sailing. As the boats complete the course, they go through a gate, and that counts as a lap. There are no breaks, there are no holds for any reason. So if you have to stop, you can, but everybody else keeps on sailing. At the end of 4 hours, the boat still sailing that has the most laps is the one that wins. I should say at this point that we stopped kind of giving out trophies for every race and every regatta race a long time ago. What we do now is we give out perpetual trophies that skippers can hold on to for a year. And then we put their names in a trophy room at our website so that we recognize the winners of the various series, the winners of the Enduro and the Old Folks Regatta, and various information about winners. So if you're interested in that, take a look at our website. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of our most favored sailing venues, and that's, of course, Woods Hole. The Woods Hole Model Boat Show and corresponding regattas have always been a highlight for us. And the sponsors and the participants are always very warm, very welcoming, and very enthusiastic, especially when we hand our transmitters over to them and they get the opportunity to actually sail the model yachts. I'm here to tell you they're pretty fierce skippers. We miss coming to Woods Hole, and we, as we mentioned before, look forward to returning soon. While our focus is on racing during the season, we do try and give something back to our community. And the Minuteman Model Yacht Club supports and mentors a model boating program for the Pappas Rehabilitation Hospital for Children. It's previously called the Massachusetts Hospital School. This is a full-time residency program for children that have been challenged mentally and physically and would benefit from full-time structured physical therapy and learning. This is their pool. Initially, we built and supported a fleet of sailboats, and we would set up fans along the side here. They would put pins on the bows of the sailboat and pop balloons. This activity was fun, of course, as you might imagine, and it provided exercise and helped the kids gain, improve their coordination and motor control. After the short hiatus and they gained with a change in leadership, we decided to actually build them and provide them with a fleet of radio controlled tugboats. If it's possible, whoops, let me go back, sorry. There. If possible, the kids had even more fun with the tugboats. They went fast and the fans weren't needed, and they could still have races and pop balloons with the bows. And this is all the tugboats we built sitting out on Jim's dock. I also need to tell you, excuse me, that the National Model Yacht Club has a strong commitment to their community as well. They actually actively mentor kids from the Boys and Girls Club of America. They also conduct model sailing and mentoring classes as part of a STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEAM program, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math program. Both of these programs are well received and are repeated often. In the upper left-hand corner, their Commodore is tuning one of his vintage model yachts from the 1940s. And on the right, some of the slides of the pool action with the sailboats. So in the end, I'd like to again say thank you to Debbie, thank you to Jennifer, thank you to the Woods Hole Historical Museum Society for sponsoring these past events. We enjoy your spectacular venue and hope to be sailing in there soon. Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you, Cliff. That's great. Debbie, dare we open up to questions, or should we call it a night and say anybody who wants to stay and chat? We could do that. Are there any questions? Did you get any on chat, Debbie?
No.
Okay. So how do you want to proceed? We'll do whatever you want.
Does anyone have any questions now, or do you want us to just stay and talk? Or Griffin, how would we proceed with this if we?
There is a chat button on the bottom of your screen if you're interested.
Right. If you have questions, put it on the chat. But I'm wondering if we want to stay on, and some folks want to chat, not online. I mean, actually chat with each other.
Speak.
Speak.
If you want to
Yes.
speak, unmute yourself.
And
If that's the plan, then I will stop the recording and
Okay.
I will leave, but I will turn all of the hosting powers over to Jennifer, and you're welcome to stay and chat for as long as you would like. And then you just hit end meeting for all, and everyone, once you've all said bye, and that'll be that. So it's really quite simple. Jennifer, I'll give you the power and you'll be able to hit end meeting for all, but no one has to
Thank you,
stick around if
Griffin.
they don't
Thank
need
you.
to.
Thank you.